Welcome to the second part of Chapter 12. Here we will discuss some of the more contemporary theories and approaches to better understanding leadership. Today, it is more common for researchers to explore leadership as the layperson would, and moving away from the trait, behavioral, and contingency theories to new approaches to understanding leadership. Some of the current studies explore leadership characteristics that have been linked to leader effectiveness. Some of those include intelligence and self-understanding. Of course, we want leaders who have the intelligence to analytically examine the organizational environment and make the right strategic decisions. But we also want leaders who have a high level of self-understanding. This relates to the concept of self-awareness that we discussed in the beginning of this semester. Leaders who are self-aware recognize their strengths and weaknesses and know where they need to supplement themselves with others. They also understand their own personalities and value systems, which better enables them to understand how they may be perceived by others and some of the potential challenges that they could experience with working with others. We want leaders who are energetic and determined to accomplish organizational goals. We want leaders who have good social skills. This is related to the concept of emotional intelligence that we discussed earlier this semester. Leaders who are self-aware are aware of their own emotions and able to manage them. And leaders who have strong social skills are better able to recognize and correctly identify other people's emotions and respond empathetically. Of course, we also want leaders who are ethical, who behave with integrity. This is becoming increasingly important as consumers also speak with their wallets and reward organizations that demonstrate high levels of integrity and adherence to strong core values. And so organizations and leaders who are honest, principled, ethical, who keep their promises, and whose actions match their words are going to experience or be judged as having higher level of integrity and are going to be more supported, better received by both their organizational members and customers. We want leaders who are creative because of the constant change. We'll discuss organizational change at the end of this semester. Many organizations are undergoing change, experiencing change in their business and general environments, and leaders have to have the ability to respond to those changes and adjust the organizational strategy to take advantage of opportunities and protect themselves against threats. And so it's important for our leaders to be creative so that they can respond to external changes and threats. We want leaders who have a healthy level of self-confidence and self-esteem. Of course, not to the extent that they become narcissistic and no longer question their own decisions, but we want leaders who have a high level, a healthy level of self-esteem. Beyond the new leadership characteristics, there are some additional approaches to understanding leadership. Two of those often are discussed together, even though they are not opposites of each other. They're simply different approaches. The first is transactional leadership. Transactional leadership is a leadership style in which the leader sees the relationship with the followers as an exchange relationship, and the leader seeks to motivate followers to engage in desired behaviors by using extrinsic motivation. And so in this exchange relationship, the leader seeks to influence followers by using extrinsic rewards. If you work through the weekend to complete a task, I will reward you with 2 days off with pay next week. This is an example of a transactional leadership approach where the leader seeks to motivate followers to influence followers through extrinsic rewards. This approach can be very effective and generate very quick response from followers, especially if the extrinsic outcome is motivating to them. Of course, this approach has its limitations because as soon as the extrinsic reward is taken away, the behavior will also stop. And so while transactional leadership can be quite effective, it is not optimal because as soon as the extrinsic reward disappears, so does the ability to influence. Transformational leaders take a different approach to leadership, to the influence process. Transformational leaders want to influence followers to transcend the self-interest on behalf of the organization. So transformational leaders try to engage followers in a way that inspires them to engage in specific behaviors intrinsically. There is no specific extrinsic reward associated with specific behaviors. Rather, followers decide to engage in specific behaviors that the leader asks of them because they believe it is the right thing to do, because they are excited to be part of something greater than themselves, because they believe that this is good for the organization as a whole and therefore for them as well. But there is no direct reward associated with the behavior. The motivation is intrinsic in nature. How do transformational leaders accomplish this influence process? Transformational leaders tend to rely on their charisma to inspire followers. They use inspirational appeal to try to inspire followers, to motivate followers to engage in desirable behaviors. And so very often, transformational leaders will try to appeal to followers' emotions, try to paint an exciting image of the future of where the organization could potentially be if everyone came together to support the leader's strategic plan. And if employees are indeed inspired and excited to be part of something greater than themselves, they are then successfully influenced by the leader. The leader has essentially transformed them to focus on the organizational interest and the organizational well-being rather than their own. And I've included a video on your As You Learn site of an example from the world of sports on how inspirational appeal might work. Inspirational appeal is also very effective in trying to overcome resistance to change, and we will revisit that when we discuss change later this semester. Intellectual stimulation means that the leader is inviting questions, welcomes feedback from followers, wants the followers to question the status quo and ask difficult questions, generate new ideas. And transformational leader is likely to empower followers to make sure that they feel that they are full participants in the process, in the organization's success. And so intellectual stimulation would welcome followers' criticism, feedback, questions. The leader will seek those out as a way to enhance the overall organization's success. Individualized consideration is very closely related to those consideration type behaviors that we discussed earlier, where the leader pays attention to his or her followers, gets to know them, understand their likes, their dislikes, their motivations, their aspirations, what they want to accomplish, and tries to motivate them by matching them with assignments, responsibilities that match their needs and interests. And so these are some of the behaviors that transformational leaders are likely to engage in. While transactional leadership can be quite effective, times of radical change and times of crisis require a different type of leadership. And transformational leadership is uniquely suitable for these kinds of situations in which the organization needs to undergo radical change in order to survive, or the organization is facing a time of crisis which requires the entire organization to come together and address the threats it is facing. This slide lists a few additional, more current approaches to the study of leadership. And there can be quite some overlap between the different views of leadership. Value-based leadership is a leadership style that closely adheres to core values of the organization. It's an approach to leadership in which the leader seeks to very clearly articulate the core values of the organization and then engage in behaviors that are consistent, congruent with these core values. For example, if the leader argues that the key core value of the organization is superior customer service, many efforts in the organization will be directed towards accomplishing that core value. Value-based leadership can also, of course, overlap with some other approaches. For example, authentic leadership. An authentic leader is a leader who is true to him or herself, a leader who has an understanding of his or her strengths and weaknesses and the need to develop those. The leader who is well aware and remains true to his or her core values, right? So there can be overlap between authentic leadership and value-based leadership. Value-based leadership is an approach to leadership in which the bottom line becomes less important than the leader's capacity to embody the organizational values. For example, honesty and integrity. And so in those types of leadership approaches, it's not always that the leader pursues profitability. The leader might pursue core values and organizational vision and mission before. Servant leadership is another related approach in which the leader sees his or her key responsibility as developing his or her followers. My job as a leader is to work in the background and support my followers, support my team, get them the resources they need, the development that they need, the encouragement that they need to be successful. And a servant leadership will frequently celebrate the successes of his or her followers, of his or her team, will not be the kind of leader who takes credit for other people's work and does not equate his or her own success with the organization's success, but rather will credit his or her employees, the team. And so a servant leader is a leader who is likely to focus on developing his or her team, who is very humble and authentic, practices stewardship on behalf of his employees, practices a lot of empowerment, which is something that we'll discuss in the next chapter. Shared leadership or collaborative leadership refer to the context of groups and teams. And we discussed groups and teams in chapter 10 and discussed the role of the leader in a team and how the role of the leader can evolve as the team matures. In shared leadership, the leader plays almost equal role with team members. If in the traditional approach to leadership, the view is that the leader needs to make decisions, delegate work, keep employees motivated to accomplish the work. In the shared leadership or collaborative leadership approach, there is emphasis on different types of skills for the leader to have. The leader moves from the responsibility of delegating and motivating others to becoming a negotiator, a broker, an individual who negotiates relationships, decisions within a team. And so shared leaders or leaders in a team context need a somewhat different skill set compared to leaders who are in the traditional top-down hierarchical command and control model. Positive leadership is rooted in positive psychology, the idea that it's the leader's role to focus on strength and opportunities rather than on management by exception. Management by exception refers to a situation in which leaders focus on what's wrong, on what's broken, and provide feedback on those things. Positive leadership doesn't suggest that you are to ignore those things, but recommends focusing on people's strength, on people's successes so as to generate additional successes as a result. As we discussed earlier, when we looked at the contemporary characteristics associated with successful leadership, ethical leadership is another key consideration. And it is more and more common for organizational members to pay attention to the conduct of the leader and to choose an organization based on the conduct of the leader. But it's also becoming increasingly important to external stakeholders like customers in terms of how they judge the ethical conduct of the leadership and the organization as a whole. And so ethical leadership focuses on humane orientation, treating all followers with dignity and respect, treating all stakeholders with dignity and respect. Ethical leaders focus on justice orientation by making fair and consistent, transparent decisions. We've discussed some of the potential consequences when employees perceive injustice. We discussed equity theory when we looked at motivation, and equity theory suggested that when employees perceive inequity, lack of justice, they are likely to either quit or reduce their performance or even sabotage intentionally. And so these are some of the things that ethical leadership that is focusing on justice and fairness is going to prevent. Ethical leadership, of course, also focuses on the long-term implications of the organization's conduct. Also looking at sustainable actions towards all stakeholders. Leaders must be able to recognize all organizational stakeholders. Stakeholders are not just shareholders. Shareholders are one type of stakeholder, but organizational stakeholders are much broader. Organizational stakeholders include managers, middle managers, supervisors, employees, customers, suppliers, the community within which the organization operates, the environment. So there is a very broad consideration of all stakeholders, and ethical leadership takes those into consideration and seeks to identify all the ways in which all the stakeholders are impacted by the decisions that the organization makes. And so there is increased pressure on organizations and organizational leadership to focus on ethical conduct and even go beyond and focus on sustainable actions. And many organizations are judged by the actions of their leaders and their efforts of their leaders to move towards more sustainable behavior. And as I mentioned earlier, customers are able to speak with their wallets, and information is very easily disseminated thanks to information technology and social media, and organizations are becoming increasingly aware of the importance of behaving sustainably and responsibly. Earlier this semester, we talked about the importance of creativity and innovation to organizations. This will become even more clear when we discuss organizational change and the ways in which organizations need to respond to external changes that are ongoing and sometimes very rapid. And so, of course, the idea of creative leadership is also related here. We want leaders who are able to respond to external opportunities and threats. And these types of leaders tend to have a lot of passion to accomplishing the organization's vision and mission. These leaders are courageous and open to change. They are willing to learn by practicing self-reflection and self-critique, developing a strong level of self-awareness and recognizing where their weaknesses are. They are empathetic to how change might influence others. Change is not easy on organizational members, and creative leaders find ways to help their followers cope with change. Creative leaders have a high level of social energy. They are able to energize others and stimulate movements, get the organization moving forward towards change. Of course, again, the idea of compassion as empathy, emotional intelligence to understand that not all organizational members will be comfortable with change. They are able to expend personal energy to accomplish the overall purpose. And so it's important for leaders to be open to change. If we want to compare management and leadership, how are the two essentially different? Managers' role is to create stability within organizations, decide what needs to happen when, delegate responsibilities to different team members, provide feedback as to how the work is progressing, make sure we are staying on target. Managers' responsibility is to create stability within the organization so that employees have clarity on what they need to do. The leader's responsibility is to identify what is the organization trying to accomplish, what's our mission, our vision, what's our key purpose for existing, and then identifying opportunities and threats outside the organization and generate change so as to be able to respond to those opportunities and threats. And so while management is about stability, leadership needs to be about change. We need both in organizations. We need someone to monitor the environment, pay attention to what's happening outside the organization so that we can respond on time. And we need somebody inside the organization to focus on stability and order so that employees have clarity on what needs to happen every day. And so creative leaders, leaders who have courage to question the status quo, who have courage to generate change, who are willing to learn, who have a lot of energy and are able to inspire others, are going to be essential, especially when our organizations are undergoing change. This concludes our discussion of leadership. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.